thank you all for coming. My name's Bill Conway. I'm running for Cook County State's Attorney. And first, of course, I want to thank the Institute of Politics for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and then a bit of my platform, and then look forward to having a lively discussion with all of you about the State's Attorney's Office and politics, or whatever you'd like to talk about, frankly. So I was born and raised here in Chicago. I'm married, and I have a daughter who turned 11 weeks old today. I do not get to spend as much time with my daughter as I'd like, although I spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of world I want her to grow up in, of course. I worked at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office from 2006 to 2012. Spent my initial years in misdemeanors and traffic, and worked bond court, worked some violent crime, but really spent the bulk of my time in the public corruption and financial crimes unit. Tried a lot of cases while I was there. Tried 108 cases. 74 of them were guilty, 33 of them were not guilty, and I had a hung jury, actually. And the hung jury was an armed robbery involving a young man who walked out of Jimmy's Bar, actually, down the street. And actually, a University of Chicago student walked out of Jimmy's Bar, and he was held up at machine gun point. The jury was hung in that case, but he later pled guilty and received 9 years. So he was a guest of the state for a period of time. But really, I spent the bulk of my time, like I said, in public corruption, financial crimes, specifically in cases where you had to very deliberately follow money to get to a conclusion or the root cause of a problem. Cases like the welfare administrator of Hanover Township, who embezzled $200,000 worth of welfare funds by essentially putting a lot of fake people on welfare and embezzling that money. I also had a village accountant in Harwood Heights who, through a complicated payroll scheme, embezzled about $135,000. Worth noting, Harwood Heights is roughly the size of this room, so it was a big problem for them. I also had a Chicago police officer who befriended an older gentleman with dementia, and then over time put all of his assets into his own name. So, and I could name 40-ish more examples of cases like that. I am also, and it's worth noting actually, during a lot of my time at the State's Attorney's Office, I was working on getting my MBA at night here at the Booth School of Business. Actually, I started in the spring of '09 there, and I was the first term where they were starting to call it Booth instead of the GSB at that point. So, fun fact. But graduated. I worked at it at a very slow pace until I left the State's Attorney's Office in 2012, and so I graduated from Booth in spring of 2013. I'm also a Navy veteran. I'm a Navy intelligence officer now, still a reservist. And I was deployed to Qatar and Afghanistan from July of 2017 until April of 2018. And my job over there was figuring out, where does the Taliban get its money from? And the reason we wanted to figure that out is because we want to be able to attack those money sources so they couldn't buy weapons to attack us, to attack our troops. And it's those experiences and many others that have led me to run for state's attorney on a platform of balancing our criminal justice reform efforts, getting after the gun crime epidemic that we have here by disrupting the supply chain that brings all these guns here, and then also getting politics out of the state's attorney's office. And to dive into each of those a little bit, when we talk about balancing our criminal justice reform efforts, we have to remember what the purpose of jail is. Jail is not a place for people that are poor, it's not a place for people that are addicted, it's not a place for people that are mentally ill. But yet, at the end of this past year, end of 2019, there were 259 people in Cook County Jail who could be bonded out for less than $1,000. And even putting the humanity of that aside, the taxpayers pay about $160 a night to house these folks, so that doesn't make any sense. And when we talk about the addicted, drug cases represent about 40% of all felonies that are prosecuted in Cook County. So if we are going to really change the way we think about the criminal justice system, that is the place we have to start. And as we look at that going forward, drug possession, we need to treat that much more as a public health problem than something that can be solved in the criminal justice system. I will say this, the dealers that, on the west side will go to the alley and hand out free samples the day before payday, those people we got to prosecute the hell out of. But the users, that we need to start thinking about as a public health problem. And the mentally ill, the largest mental health clinic in the state of Illinois and maybe the nation is Cook County Jail. And I don't lay that at the sheriff's feet. I don't lay that at the state's attorney's feet. But I will say there is clearly something wrong in our society that's the case. And we need to be thinking about how we can handle mental health, certainly outside of the jail system. But, I say all that, but that also said, if somebody commits a crime with a gun, if somebody commits a violent crime, I think that person should go to jail. Like the guy I prosecuted who committed the armed robbery outside Jimmy's. That is somebody I think should stay in jail. But yet today we hear repeatedly about how that's not happening. But if we are going to really get after the gun crime epidemic we have here, we really need to disrupt the supply chain that brings all these guns here to Chicago and to Cook County. And to put some numbers on our gun crime epidemic. Last year in Los Angeles, there were 259 murders. In New York, there were 318 murders. And yet, here in Chicago, a much smaller city, we had 492 murders. And the Chicago Police Department seized more than 10,000 illegal guns last year. By far more than any police department in any city in America. And when we look at gun cases, you have somebody commits a crime with a gun, a legal gun. They probably bought that gun from their friend. Friend probably bought it out of the back of a trunk of a car with 7 or 10 guns in it. Those probably came from a house with 30 to 40 guns in it. And those probably came off a truck with 150 to 200 guns on them with straw buyers and all sorts of things like that. And in 60% of cases, that truck probably came from out of state. When we look at illegal guns used in crimes in Chicago, it's about 60% out of state, 40% in state. And the problem is at the local level, we keep picking off this person. And at the federal level, they take this if it falls in their lap. But they're not going to be taking a lot of single gun cases, nor should they be. But we need to spend our resources really working our way up that chain. And if we do get to a point where we have identified a straw buyer in Indiana or Minnesota or what have you, we will happily turn that case over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we currently, and I have a lot of friends that work at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we currently have an administration there that will happily take that case, which is great. And then so I've talked a little bit about balancing our criminal justice reform efforts. I have spoken a bit about getting after our gun crime epidemic by disrupting the supply chain that brings them here. But also, we need to get politics out of the state's attorney's office. And I'm not talking about that one case. What I'm talking about is the kind of things that I saw as a public corruption prosecutor. And for a long time, the state's attorney's office has been very tied to the Cook County Democratic Party. And what I can promise you is that I will not be tied to the Cook County Democratic Party. In fact, they're working pretty hard to try and make sure I'm not elected. So because of that, when I am elected, I'm not going to owe anybody anything other than the voters and the people that put me there. And that's why I can promise you that when I'm elected, there will be a public corruption reckoning we've been waiting for in Chicago for decades. That's what I can promise you. But I also don't, I don't want to lose sight of really the main job of the state's attorney's office. And when I think back on my time as an assistant state's attorney, the thing that I was proud of is that I always tried to make sure that victims had a voice. And something I think about often, very early in my time, I was assigned a misdemeanor court on the west side, and And I had more than 100 cases a day at that point. And in fact, 100 cases would be kind of a slow day. And I had my partner that day didn't call in, so I had to deal with 100 cases by myself. I'm trying to talk to victims, make plea offers, get everything going. And a young lady walks up with her son, who looked like he was about 9 or 10 years old. And she explained she was his mother, and she said, look, my son, he was, some people came out and beat him up and threw him to the ground and took his money, and he had some injuries and things, and it wasn't prosecuted as a felony. It is what it is, but he's really scared and nervous about it. I know you got a million cases, but anything you can do for my son. And I remember looking at this woman, and I said, look, when I was a kid, I was mugged. Not a big deal. It's happened to a lot of people, but it's part of the reason I do the job I do. And I can promise you that I don't know if the judge is going to care. I don't know if a jury's going to care, but I care what happened to your son. And I'm going to make sure that we get him some justice. And I just remember the look of appreciation and satisfaction from the mother and her son, who had kind of been hiding behind his mom the whole time. Then he kind of came out and shook my hand and everything. And I just want to make sure that the voice of victims, doesn't really ever get lost, because it's really the reason that we're there. So again, Bill Conway, and I'm running on a platform of balancing our criminal justice reform efforts, getting after the gun crime epidemic by really focusing on the supply chain that brings all these guns here, and just getting politics out of the state's attorney's office. And with that, I also will say I have, before I was a full-time candidate, I had many jobs. One of them is I'm a professor at DePaul. So very excited to be back in an academic environment, to speak with you all. And I can be long-winded because of my professorial thing. So I'm going to go ahead and cut myself off now, but look forward to us having a good discussion. Thank you all and thank you all again very much for coming. Any questions from Luis? I don't know if Louis. I don't know if I have to hand this mic to somebody who has a question. Oh, got it. All right, great. Yes.
So hi, my name's Indy. I'm a second year. Yeah. You kind of touched a little bit on how you feel like mental health relates to the criminal justice system. I was sort of wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about the specific ways in which you would seek how we view mental health in the criminal justice system as being reformed.
Yeah, no, so what has exacerbated the problem is that there is not a lot of mental health treatment in the city and the county. So we first need to advocate to try and reopen our mental health clinics. And I understand there's not unlimited resources, but by having mental health treatment done purely out of Cook County Jail, and I say this noting that Cook County Jail is an awful, awful place. So much worse than like the Illinois Department of Corrections. But having it done out of there, the fear is you're breeding recidivism. So to the extent that there are more mental health resources and we can divert people away from jail to treatment, we need to be doing that every time that we can. And hopefully, I know there's a strong push to get the mental health clinics reopened in Chicago amongst the aldermen. So to the extent that that is done, I look forward to partnering with them to saying, hey, these are, or the sheriff has shown that these people are the people that are most in need of it or would be most successful with it, so that we're making sure that we're not only making the community safer, but we're also helping people with their mental health problems too.
You talked about the gun supply chain, and when you get to that very large level, that feels like it's probably a lot of dollars. What does that level actually look like? Is it organizations, single individuals? Have we actually gotten to that end of the trail?
Yeah, there are cases at the U.S. Attorney's Office where they have gotten to that, where that kind of thing has, I don't want to say fall in their lap, but they have gotten that. So what we know about the gun supply is that it, and I'm taking this a lot of this from a report done by a rival school on the other side of town. So it was, I did mention that 60% of the guns are coming from out of state and 40% are coming from in-state. However, they also did a report where they looked at about where gangs get their guns from. And what they've discovered is a lot of these smaller splinter gangs actually will often be using the same brokers to get their guns, and that's why you're going to see these large supply, these large shipments of guns, I'll say, that are coming into our city, and that's why we need to work our way up to find those folks. And it's no secret, by the way, that when we get to the top of that chain, these aren't people that are from our neighborhoods. In fact, I'll also suspect that the people that are bringing all these guns probably look a little bit more like me and less like the folks that are in those neighborhoods too. So we need to find those folks, because those are really the source of our gun crime epidemic that we have here. Sir?
When you announced back in August, was there like a specific occasion or event that made you decide that now was the time to get in the race, or like what was that decision like?
Yeah, no, it was for me, there wasn't a specific event that led to me choosing to run for state's attorney. The first thing I saw, obviously the current incumbent had run as a reformer, and one of the first things that she did after getting the Democratic nomination was holding a fundraiser at Ed Burke's house, and I was like, "Ooh, geez, that's really a bad look." It's obviously, and this was long before he was indicted, of course, but it was no secret that he was one of the most notorious favor traders in the history of Chicago politics. So that was the first thing as a public corruption prosecutor that made me nervous. And then when bail reform happened, I think there's a lot of good things about bail reform, as I've talked about. For a long time, the wrong people were being sent to jail, people that weren't a danger to the community. But then I saw all these people that charged with murder and attempt murder that were being put on electronic monitoring. And because I have a lot of friends in the sheriff's office and also worked bond court back in the day, electronic monitoring has a lot of flaws in it. I don't want to reveal how to beat the system here. Yeah, I don't think any of you are going to be in that situation, but who knows? But it made me very nervous knowing that the system doesn't really work. And so I said, this is going to have some serious bad consequences. So that was kind of the next thing that made me nervous. And that is something that continues to make me nervous, as does the lack of public corruption prosecution in this administration. So it was those sorts of things that made me start really thinking about running. And frankly, when and I would be talking to people and they say, "You need to run for state's attorney because you have you feel like you know how to fix this thing." And then when Smollett happened, it actually pushed me kind of the other way. I said, geez, now everybody and their brother is going to run for state's attorney, But nonetheless, I said, well, let's keep pushing forward here. And I've continued to do that. And every door I've gone to has swung open since then. And it's seemingly all going great. Yeah. Sir? Yeah.
So, Bill, I work for a church downtown, and aside from being a good voter or giving an unusually good sermon on the subject, I don't really have that much ability to impact corruption and just all the things that are going on.
Yeah.
I'm interested, how much, the office you're running for, how much powers does it really have? Is it, whether it's fighting inertia of having all these lawyers working under you, or, different stakeholders, different offices, do you have powers of your own, or is it really more of a bully pulpit where you're trying to persuade?
Oh, no. I know this. I mean, the state's attorney's office has an enormous amount of power. I mean, putting some raw numbers behind that, the state's attorney's office prosecutes about 35,000 felonies a year, about 220,000 misdemeanors a year. Will represent Cook County in about 30,000 civil cases. So not to mention you have all the cases where the state's attorney's office has chosen not to charge somebody. So the state's attorney's office has a significant amount of ability to really affect change. I mean, there are some situations where where you're reliant upon other things, like the legislature in some situations or judges in a lot of situations, of course. But the state's attorney having the ability to charge and be a consistent advocate for the people of Cook County provides the state's attorney with a lot of ability to affect change.
So first 3 months versus first 3 years, what are the short-term things you can do just by powers of the office, and what are the things that you need to build consensus and public opinion behind?
So a couple things that I want to really do on day one is I'll start with, well, I'll name a few things that you can really do right away. One of them is, so driving on a suspended license is currently prosecuted at the felony level roughly 100 times a month. And the people that are prosecuted for felony driving on a suspended license are not generally people that have 3 DUIs and they continue to drive. Like, it's not, I mean, those people, I'm happily prosecuting them at the felony level. But if you acquire 3 cases, you can then be charged at the felony level. And I started looking into the numbers on this because I was in court a few weeks ago and I saw somebody pleading guilty to felony driving on a suspended license and getting a 2-year sentence. So I went to the public defender who was representing this man. I said, well, what happened here? How did he get 2 years on felony driving on a suspended license? That's crazy. And he said, well, he was found not guilty of a DUI in 1992, but there was still his civil summary suspension that he never cleared, and then he was caught 4 times over about a 30-year period driving. And so by the 4th time, charges a felony, he took 2 years. And I said, that's preposterous that person got that amount of time. So we need to change. We got to change the way that's being charged. A second thing that is far more gets much more at the gun issue is, so when we look at the Bail Reform Act, there are the Bail Reform Act at a high level lays out 3 buckets of how people can be charged. You have people that where their bail is presumed or even no cash bond is presumed. People are just released on their individual recognizance. You also have situations where it was mandatory no bail, like murders, But then there's this whole stream of offenses where there is discretionary no bail. And the state's attorney's office has to file a petition to ask for no bail. And the cases that this includes are criminal sexual assault, possession of a machine gun, armed habitual criminal, gun possession by a felon are a few that come to mind. And the state's attorney is required to file this petition in order to ask for these folks to be held no bail. So the state's attorney's office just wasn't doing it until very recently. Then the appellate court said to them in a recent case, People v. Gill, they said, you can't have somebody held no bail if the state didn't file this petition. So now they have filed a few of these in earnest, but they're not filing them. The default is still very much not filing. They're very, very rarely filed. And so that's something that we can change right away, that we can be asking for no bail on some of these folks that are clearly a danger to society. And a third thing is, like I said, I'm very professorial, so I can go on and on things, is, people talk a lot about retail theft prosecution. And when I was in, and I'm happy to talk more about that as well, but back when I was in misdemeanor court in 2006 and 2007, first-time offenders would often be sent to something called theft school. And theft school was a 1 or 2 day program where the person had to go essentially for 8 hours a day, and they would hear about how theft is bad and how it relates to victims and things. And clearly it was not a very serious punishment, but it was something. And so when you have a lot of these situations where a lot of retail thefts aren't arrested these days or never prosecuted, just having some form of accountability for first-time offenders, something that's not, of course, permanently on their record, but it's those sorts of things that that is something specifically that we can bring back on day one. I know it was cut several years ago by Cook County, but it is a low-cost program. If we can't get it get the county to reinstatement, I'll find private donations to make it happen because it's a low cost program. But that's the type of thing, the type of diversion program we need to have, because I think we get lost in this debate in the criminal justice system where people think there's two buckets. In bucket one is let everybody go. In bucket two is lock everybody up. And there's really an entire range of ways to hold people accountable that doesn't involve any one of those things. And theft school is a minor and easy one that we can bring back. So those are some day one things. I won't get to the 3-year ones because I've been talking for like 20 minutes, so I'm gonna ignore that for now. But maybe I speak to talk to some of the higher level things that I mentioned in my remarks. Thank you. Yeah.
Why do you think the Cook County Democratic Party made the decision months ago to endorse Kim Fox, and she's also getting endorsements from presidential candidates as well?
You know, as far as the Cook County Democratic Party, obviously President Preckwinkle and Ms. Fox are very close, and that's not, so it certainly was not a surprise. I myself I was on military duty during that time. I sent them all a letter saying, could you either A, not endorse, or B, could we have this at a time when I'm not on military duty? They chose not to do that. I could certainly note that many of the committeemen since then have been criminally indicted or had their offices raided. So maybe they didn't really want a person who was a former public corruption prosecutor to be the next state's attorney as well. As far as presidential candidates, I don't know. I only one I know of is Elizabeth Warren, who I certainly don't know personally. Certainly didn't call me and ask me for my views or anything. She chose to do. I don't know, and I don't know her relationship with Ms. Fox either. So I can't really speak to that. But I will say I don't think this is a race that's going to come down to endorsements. I think it's going to think what kind of state's attorney's office do the people want in this county, and I think that's what this race is going to come down to. Yeah, follow up by all means. Yeah.
In terms of the Cook County jail system being the largest mental health facility in the state, possibly the country, have you been in communication with Sheriff Dart about ways that there can be a systematic approach to managing the inmate situation and providing adequate mental health services citywide?
We've talked briefly. This was even before I was a candidate, really, about that. And he has said publicly on many occasions that he recognizes that's a problem. And frankly, I think he should be applauded for handling a problem that has essentially fallen into his lap, that he has come to deal with. So when I say that, I'm not criticizing Sheriff Dart certainly at all. We haven't specifically spoken about how we can divert folks better, but I know that he has been passionate about trying to get a handle on mental health in the criminal justice system, and from his very vocal comments, I'm confident that he'll be an ally in those efforts. I know, sir, look like you were raising your hand, but I know I got you, or maybe you weren't. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm kind of interested in what the process of running for an office like this is like. Yeah. You've obviously raised a ton of money, but Cook County is a really big place. Yeah. How do you get your message out in the city, in the suburbs, to all the voters you're going to need to win?
Yeah, no, it is a difficult proposition. Here is the good news for me. The incumbent in this race has huge name recognition, obviously. Depending on who you're talking to, is famous or infamous, depending on someone's point of view. But what I'm confident in, both in the numbers that I see as well as general reception I get, I am confident if I can get my name recognition anywhere near hers, that I'll win the election easily. So that's the positive. Now, I don't want to call it the negative. The challenge is, of course, this is a county of 5.2 million people. There is going to be more than 1 million people that will vote in the, let's say, 1.2, 1.3 million people that will vote in the Cook County Democratic primary. 50 wards, 30 townships. You know, I think it's about 43% of those voters will be in the suburbs too. So Cook County is a heck of a lot bigger than the city. 10 congressional districts. I could go on and on and on and on. So it requires us to be creative in getting that message out as broadly as we can. You know, so obviously TV is the most effective way, just because everybody spends time watching TV. So have to do a ton of that. But TV is a very blunt instrument in the sense that, you know, it's 30 seconds. You know, sometimes people say, hey, I love what you said in that, but I want, you know, but you didn't tell me enough about your plan. I'm like, well, it's 30 seconds. I don't, you know, if I could come and speak for 15 minutes like everywhere, then that would be great. So have to do that, but also have to, you know, do everything you can getting to different audiences, certainly digitally and radio and things like that as well. But on top of that, look, I just try and go everywhere I can. You know, I spoke to an hour before I came to speak to you, I spoke to the West Side Ministers Coalition. So just to kind of, you know, and I make sure that I go everywhere and that everyone knows that I'm trying to be the state's attorney for everybody. And I'll tell you what, everywhere I go, the reception is good. So that it seems to be coming together well. That said, people are nice people, so who knows? but that's kind of some broad strokes. And frankly, it's my first time running for office, of course. So the good news is I know exactly what I want to do as state's attorney. The challenge is more that I had no idea how to be a candidate. So it is something that I learn along the way as well, and it is a wild process.
I just have kind of a follow-up. I know they mentioned the money you've raised in your campaign, and I've been following the race some, and one of the things that's been troubling to me is seeing news about some of your money, a large portion of it coming from like connection to the Carlisle group. Because I'm a student organizer, and I know that the Carlisle group has profited off of like tear gas and Ferguson protests and things like that. And so I guess my question is just, is that something you approve of? And if not, is that money that you're willing to like consider giving back?
So it is. I am not shy about the fact that my father was a founder of the Carlisle group. My Booth graduate also, by the way. I have no idea if I kind of hear these crazy things, you know, about the firm that I've never heard before. You know, I can also tell you they owned Dunkin' Donuts, they owned Hertz Rental Car, they owned Supreme clothing brand, they owned Montclair jackets, they own things that would be considered much more benign, I would say. But you know, I would also say that you know, I never worked at that firm. Have not been shy about the fact I was going to use significant family resources to get our message out there. And the reason for that is because what we've seen in Chicago for too long is that there is an entrenched political machine. And that entrenched political machine often puts people in power. And when those people get in power, they owe something to that machine. So I will be fortunate in the sense that I'm not going to owe anything to anybody but the voters that put me there. And I say this, of course, it's hard to imagine this ever happening, but if anything involving my father's firm or my mom or anything like that, or involving either of my parents, ever came before the state's attorney's office, of course I would recuse myself in that situation. Yeah. So I may not convince you that the Carlisle Group is a great firm, but I hope that but my independence from it and the office's independence from that, hopefully I can speak to that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Virginia. I'm a Harris student.
Oh, great. All right.
I'm from California, so I'm an outsider.
here. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about your priorities around the public corruption issues here, and kind of what you see as like the number one thing that you would want to do. Like, for me as an outsider, when I hear some news clips, I'm just like, what? But
Yeah. You know, when I think back on the type of things that we see here a lot, we have, people that will be given a grant, and then they got to pay some kind of kickback. You have a shopkeeper who wants to put a bigger sign outside his or her shop and has to pay off somebody to do that, or somebody who gets a building inspection and has to give a little extra. And at the U.S. Attorney's Office, they can take the Marty Sandoval case and they'll take Louis Arroyo. These are prominent state representatives. But they don't have kind of time for some of the cases that I spoke about. And what we do have, though, here in Chicago and Cook County is we have a lot of great inspectors general. There are 11 of them. And the city of Chicago Inspector General is very well known, and Cook County Inspector General is very well known. But the Chicago Housing Authority has one. City Colleges has one. Chicago Public Schools have one too, although that gentleman's in a little bit of trouble at the moment. So, but the way it works right now is these inspectors general will take these cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 will get taken, and then they'll come to the state's attorney's office. And they do a great job on these cases. I mean, when we get them, having seen them, when we get them at the state's attorney's office, they often will come at a time where you can essentially lock in one witness at the grand jury, subpoena some bank records to match up with the embezzled entity's bank records, and the case is ready for indictment. So we very much have an ability to really get after these public corruption cases, but for whatever reason, it's just there's not the will or the determination to do that today. Something else we will have also is an ability to have whistleblowers come forward. And right now, in the public, I'm thinking back to when I was there, in the public corruption unit of the state's attorney's office, they rotate essentially who will take incoming cases, who's doing felony review for that unit each week. And so what we'll also have that person will also be the monitor of the whistleblower hotline. So when someone who's a government employee wants to call in and say, hey, I'm seeing this corruption here, that they will have a direct access to prosecutors that can do something about it. And part of the problem you see now is you may not have whistleblowers come forward because when you think about what we see today, if somebody saw Marty Sandoval engaging in bad behavior, or they saw Safe Speed, the red light cameras, engaging in bad behavior, or Ed Burke engaging in bad behavior, things that have looked like they're going to be all handled at the federal level, all of those people gave to the current incumbent's campaign. So the whistleblower is much less likely to come forward, but obviously that's not going to be an issue for me. So I am excited about our ability to really get after public corruption at a deep level in this town that we've all wanted to see for a long time. And perhaps you even see, Chicago still has that reputation even out in California. And welcome to Chicago, by the way. Sorry about the weather. Yeah.
Have you looked at other comparable cities, county attorneys, and are there any best practices you see around the country that you'd like to bring here that we're not doing?
Yeah, certainly one of them is, and this is more at the police level, is community policing needs to be much more of a philosophy than a program. And that's why I'm excited that we have, Charlie Beck is one of the world-renowned people when it comes to community policing. And the fact that, and I suspect that the person who becomes the full-time superintendent will also have that same philosophy. So I think it's great that we are going to have more community policing more as a philosophical bent here in Cook County, here in Chicago, I mean. But with that, something that I want to do is, you know, when you have a witness to a crime bravely come forward and they talk to the police, and hopefully that's a police officer they know or have seen before, at some point that person will be turned over to the state's attorney's office to talk to the state's attorney. And it would be good if that person was then thinking, okay, I'm going to go, those are the people that work for Bill, you know, who I saw at a community meeting or spoke at some other event or met personally at church or what have you. Or better yet, oh, that's John, he works for Bill, like, you know, to make it something even better. And that's why I plan to be somebody who is very engaged in the community as the state's attorney. But also what we see in New York and LA is there have been in the past a greater alignment of when somebody commits a gun crime, that the punishment for that is more swift and certain, as opposed to here. And some interesting things is now they have new bail reform in New York. And a lot of it I think is good, as I've talked about, but suddenly a lot of gun offenders are getting out, and they had a 30% increase in shootings last month in January. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And it's also a reason that I am passionate on the gun side about doing something about our gun crime epidemic. So those are a couple things with community engagement, and then making sure that we keep dangerous folks off the streets. But I am not for, by the way, longer sentences for gun crimes. I just want to say that. I'm more on the swift and certain side than I am on the lengthy sentences there.
And would you modify bail reform, or would you,
Yeah.
talk about throwing the baby out the bathwater?
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, no, I absolutely, I think a lot of bail reform is good in the sense that if somebody's not a danger to the community, we don't want to be sending them to Cook County Jail. Cook County Jail is, like I said, it's a terrible place. But if somebody does commit a violent crime or a crime with a gun, I think that person needs to go to jail. And I'll tell you what, everywhere I go, when I say that, people seem to agree. But yet today, it's not happening. So, and I talked about how we can do better with that in terms of filing those petitions. When I got into the professorial weeds about Section 6.1 of the Bail Reform Act, et cetera, et cetera. I'll have a lecture at the law school about it, and then I can really go in the weeds. Yeah. Thank you. Wonderful. I see we are past 1:15. So I really want to thank you all for coming out and us having a wonderful academic discussion about the issues at the state's attorney's office. Of course, I hope you'll consider voting for me if you're in favor of balancing our criminal justice reform efforts, really getting after the gun crime epidemic that we have here in Cook County, and also just really getting politics out of the state's attorney's office, because that's what I'm going to be working tirelessly every day when elected to do. But thank you all, and thank you all very much for coming. And thank you to the Institute of Politics for having me.